So the I work with the organization, are a 23-year-old organization working on the health and well-being of Black women. Our office is located in Leimert Park of Los Angeles, but we do work throughout California. We also have a satellite office in Stockton, California. So with our commitment to the health and well-being of Black women and girls, our work started out with reproductive justice issues. And it quickly began to look at the chemicals that we use, the chemicals in the many hair care products and beauty products and even cleaning products actually impact our health and well-being. The challenge was that we didn't have the data. We just felt like it impacted our health and well-being. And I give great props or respect to Dr. Tulukwa, who shared her story at the beginning and then also began looking at the work of cancers and the work of workers in the intersection. So my story, or our story here today, begins with defining beauty and the current beauty standards in the US. And those beauty standards really celebrate white. They celebrate light skin, European facial features, hair textures, and body types. And Black women are far from those. And being far from those, our job became to imitate those white beauty standards or make those impossible choices to achieve those white beauty standards because they impacted our financial well-being. They impacted how far we matriculated in education systems, and they also impacted our mental and emotional health. But those standards reinforce racism, and those standards reinforce anti-Black racism in particular. So I just want to mention here that when we're talking about the beauty standards, that Black women spend annually over $8 billion. And we spend more than other racial and ethnic groups. And the vast majority of that is spent on hair care products. So what we began to notice is that Black women experience more hormone-related problems. I believe 8 out of 10 Black women will tell you about fibroids, particularly uterine fibroid tumors. And some of this is around detangler use to straighten our hair and to comb our hair easier, to have our hair the right color. And we are directly exposed to that via the many chemicals that we use on a daily basis. I will say, just as a note, that Black women were using these products not because we think that a white beauty standard is prettier than a Black beauty. It is because we needed to do it to blend in and try to mitigate the white beauty standards that we are all forced to in this country. So just to reiterate that, wasn't that we thought that white women or these white beauty standards were better than ours. It is that we had to, because of the racism that we face, to survive, adopt these beauty standards. So here's the history of that. The Tiggon laws were in the 1700s, a great long time ago. And this required Black women to wear headscarves or some type of head coverings. And this started in New Orleans, Louisiana. And on one side, I have a picture of this Black woman, because it did not matter at that point in time if you were, quote, a freed Black woman or if you were an enslaved Black woman. You had to have your hair, your head covered. And then on the right side, how Black women took that and made fashion and made style out of these laws, out of these antiquated laws. I'm going to move to 2010, and this is Chastity Jones. And Chastity Jones was offered a job, but the job was dependent upon if she cut her locks. Ms. Jones decided not to cut her locks and to sue the catastrophe management company. And she lost. And then the EEOC sued in 2013 and she lost. And then in 2016, they went to the 11th Court of Appeals and lost again. So up until as recently as 2016, Black women could not wear locks or were discriminated against if they chose this natural hairstyle. We'll talk about taking stocks later. In the 60s, there was this whole movement around Black is Beautiful. That is a picture of Angela Davis. And by this number, by 1972, a study in St. Louis showed that 40%, only 40% of Black women were wearing their hair in natural styles, because once again, that was the discrimination point. Black women were forced to either blend in, not get the job, not have that health and well-being that comes along from financial security. And I put this picture here because of the Just For Me picture at the top in the left-hand corner. These were the products that were in the stores, that were placed in the stores at the level of young Black girls, so they could pressure their parents into buying these products and putting them on their hair. So what we were learning in our study is that Black girls as young as 4 were having their hair texturized or having chemicals put in their hair. We worked with breast cancer prevention partners. We worked with Silent Spring. And this was the report that we put: overexposed and underprotected. So what we also found that is not here, that many of the products that are aggressively marketed to Black women do not have a complete list of the ingredients on their labels. What can we do? Right. So the first thing that we can do is talk about a cultural shift. Right. As long as there is this anti-Black racism, as long as there is discrimination, then Black women will try to figure out how to blend in. We do that cultural shift through acknowledging that racism. Then we also create better policy. We create trainings, we create education and awareness. And then we hold not only our elected officials, but the folks who are in charge of regulations, FDA, et cetera, accountable to the products and what is in the products and the toxic level of the products. So I want to talk a moment about the Crown Act. The Crown Act happened in California and in New York. If you are not in California, or if you don't know who that is Holly Mitchell, who sponsored the Crown Act, and Governor Gavin Newsom, who signed it. And you see there is a room full of Black women in varying degrees of natural hair who supported this Crown Act, which was about anti-discrimination based on hair. So it, to me, speaks to the importance of the involvement and the engagement of women of color and of Black women in particular. Um, and not only this is at the policy level, but we also need that at the research level also. If we do not have researchers like Dr. Kwa, uh, Bhavna, and some of the other people, we won't have the answers to the questions about the, the influence and impact of the chemicals that we use around beauty on our health and well-being. We also have to talk about the involvement of, like I said, the regulatory. So California Department of Toxic and Substance Control published this report last year in 2021. And it really looked at the hair straightening products used in workplaces. It looked at the barbers and beauty salons. And that department in California has the ability to demand that manufacturers publish their ingredients. It has the power to regulate the toxic chemicals that are in those products. But until there was a cadre of women of color working at those organizations, the call for that demand and the call for that investigation was not there. So that is one of the ways, one of the many reasons that it is so important that folks of color begin to infiltrate and work in these organizations, in these regulatory, in state, and in research. The challenge then is twofold. One, the pipeline to get people into these positions, and also the baked in racism that keeps us out of those. So I wanted to talk a bit about what a narrative is. And the narratives are the invisible power of how perceptions, belief systems, and ideologies shape the way people define what is right and what is wrong. It is the power to determine what is wrong. It is more than the simple story. These narratives of, and I want to go back to, of Black women, whether we are Mammy, whether we are Jezebel, whether we are Sapphire, are very much centered in how we look, right? And how we look then determines if we get into schools, if we get into these jobs, if we are researchers and scientists who are able to answer the questions that we know our community has or has been asking. So I left this open for you to do an interactive in terms of filling out how is that defined? What does that mean? And look at how personally people feel in narrative when they see Black women. When we talk about research and why we need researchers, one of the most infamous researchers was Miriam J. Sims. He is billed as the, quote, father of gynecology. But in actuality, it is because he experimented on 3 Black women in particular, enslaved Black women, and gave them absolutely no anesthesia or humanity at all. Those 3 women were Annika, Betsy, and Lucy. There was another, Kaiser tested the easy measles vaccine on Black women in Haiti and in Florida, and treated those women or those children as if they were, human guinea pigs. And then Johnson & Johnson very recently was called to task for their experimentation on talc And we should all know at this point that Johnson & Johnson's talc powder, which was in baby powder, which was heavily marketed to Black and brown women, was toxic. So the impacts of those researchers is that we are sicker, we are dehumanized. And the patterns of those research means that
Hello?
when something comes along, that like a vaccine, that we don't want to do it because it feels like more experimentation on bodies of color.
Hey,
So
Jen, just to
to
let you
talk
know,
a
if you
bit
could
about
wrap up in a couple minutes.
We'll do. To talk about when, as an organization, we have sought funding, there is that relationship of scarcity, that there's not enough funding. But folks who are funded are folks who have relationship in the funding world. And currently, those folks who have relationship in the funding world tend to be white researchers and white chemists. So that cycle of funding goes to keep us out. And so I wanted to talk about what we need to do to change this. We need more researchers and more scientists. STEAM is the science, technology, engineering, arts, and math. We need pipelines and mentors. I also want to talk about volunteer work, just in terms of the work we do in collaboration with scientists in academic institutions. We have a trend now toward more community participatory research. And we also need to know who in our community has questions, and we begin to listen to some of those questions that they had. Much like whose mom had questions about her cancer, we know that the aunties and grannies in our community have questions that we need our researchers and scientists to listen to and answer. I wanted to talk about a little bit about the ingrained racism as it keeps influencing our school systems and our economics. And really to wrap up, to talk about what do we do around solutions. We increase community researchers and researchers that come from the community that share our lived experience. We increase funding to community-based organizations and researchers. We increase attention to dismantling anti-Black racism, and that's through recognizing our everyday acts, through calling it out in the media, and through adjusting our attitudes and how we enforce racism, define the micro and the macroaggressions. We work on policy like the Crown Act. We give authority to regulatory agencies that are able to regulate the toxic chemicals in our lives. So I'll go through this where you can contact Black Women for Wellness for more information, and know that we will share some of our reports and some of our findings from some of the work that we have been doing.